Sir, this is Professor Chandrasekharan from Mary Kamaraj University, sir.
Namaste, namaste, sir.
Namaste, sir. Sir, we are welcoming you for this skill development program on behalf of the organizing committee and on behalf of the Mary Kamaraj University, sir.
Thank
Sir,
you.
we have the participants from 6 states across the country. Total number of participants is going to be 21, sir. So 50% of the students from outside the state, 50% going to be from Tamil Nadu, sir. Actually, most of them are young researchers. 3-4 are young faculty members from the participant side, sir. There are 2-3 postgraduate students. They are taking internship through STRIDE program, sir. So this is our composition, sir. So now, now I welcome Dr. Aravind for this program. So a brief introduction about the resource person today. Actually, Dr. Aravind is currently working as associate professor in the ATRI, that is Asoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. He completed the PhD from Mangalore University. He is working on various aspects of biodiversity, including the most recent emerging areas such as climate science, climate change influence, and so on. So we requested him to share his knowledge on documenting biodiversity. So even nowadays, we don't know how to store the downloaded articles. Last time our university library was debarred for elsewhere, downloading one article more than 1,000 times, repeated. So even we don't know how to handle the electronical format.
Correct.
So then we need a definite pattern to document the biodiversity, because diversity is always higher than anything. So we thought Dr. Aravind is the most suitable person to speak about. Now, on behalf of the participants, I welcome you, sir. I hand over the session to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and hopefully the participants will benefit from my talk. And if I remember correctly, you are all from plant science department or working on the plant related stuff, right? So I'll be giving the example from both plant and animals. So in biodiversity means it's not only plant or it's not only animals. The concept that is matters, right? So you can adopt the concept what is adopted in animals. Similar concept can be adopted for plants and vice versa. So don't be bogged down and don't be narrow that you are only a plant scientist and this fellow is talking about the animals. There is no such thing. It's a question. The question that is matter for your research. You are all young scientists, so the question that is matters. Okay. So I'll be sharing my presentation now. Is it visible? Is it visible?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay, I'll switch off my camera so that bandwidth will be better. Okay, visible, right? Yeah. It's a heavy file. It will take some time to load. Okay, so as Professor was telling, I'll be talking about biodiversity, documentation, and digitization. So, oh shucks. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. So I'll be talking about biodiversity documentation and digitization, the biological collection for understanding biodiversity in the Anthropocene. Anthropocene is the era where the human uh, influence is higher than ever before. Okay. Screen is available, visible, the PowerPoint screen. PowerPoint screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There is some technical issue here in my system. So, as you know, the biodiversity is the diversity of life from genes to ecosystem. Diversity in the genetic makeup. Me and you doesn't look same. Your height is not same. Dogs are there are different breeds of dogs. And different breeds of cattle, and within the same species. Could you please mute the mic on the other side? There's some noise there. Yeah, thank you. So there's a diversity not only at the species level, what we see, the birds, butterflies, ants, bacteria, plants, bryophytes, and so forth, but also there's a diversity in the genes. No two-person have got exactly same unless they are clonals. Okay, there's a diversity in the ecosystem on this planet, like forest ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem, marine ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, and so on and so forth. So what is these diversity around 1,000 or 1.5 million, that is 15 lakh, approximately that number has been identified and described. Described here, I mean the given name to an animal or a plant or a bacteria or a virus, and so on and so forth. There's estimated another 10 million, that is 10 million is 1 crore, isn't it? To 100 million species on this earth. Depends on the estimates. This is not a correct number. Nobody knows how many is there. Each one comes up with the different estimates based on some calculation. So anywhere between, they say, some scientists say 5 million, some say 10 million, some say 50, and some say 100. So let us not worry about those which are undescribed. Let us worry about these described species. The Linnaeus, Charles Darwin, maybe Godwin Austen, Hans Sloane. There are many such naturalists across the globe, and your own colleagues and friends and your teachers across the country or another part might have done the biodiversity survey and collected these specimens. It could be herbarium specimen for the angiosperm, or herbarium specimen for bryophyte, pteridophyte, and so on and so forth, or a collection of ants, beetles, grasshoppers, mammals, mollusks, and any other thing they have collected in the field. And ecologist, the scientists who study ecological aspect, they also might have collected this specimen from the field. It all has been documented and has been stored. They have been stored in various museums across the world, or the herbaria across the world, or university museum. India has got thousands of zoology and botany department. I'm sure when you did your taxonomic course, your teacher would have asked you to submit 5 or 10 herbarium sheets for angiosperms. When I was a student in undergraduate, in the first year, I was asked to submit some 10 algal specimens, algal and bryophyte. Second year, we were asked to submit pteridophyte specimens. In the third year, we were asked to submit some 10 herbarium collected college, surrounding college, or surrounding, surrounding area in the taluk or the district. So each college, maybe Madurai Kamaraj University or Purna Pratna College, where I did my BSc, or Mangalore University, where I did my masters, they have this collection of herbaria or the animal specimens which have been deposited by students and teachers. So across the world, the biodiversity collection has been deposited either in the museums, the big museum like Natural History Museum, American Museum of Natural History, Field Museum of Natural History in France, and many such across the world, or Zoological Survey of India in India, or Botanical Survey of India for the plants, or Indian Museum, and so forth. The people have deposited, they have donated, they have kept their collection. So this majority of these collections are there in the university museum or natural history museums. So, and these are some of the example to show the distribution of the museum across the world. In many of these museums, this biodiversity data has been deposited. They have been curated and deposited. And this biodiversity data, what they have collected in the form of herbarium or insect or whatever, is it a mammal or a bird or whatever, it was there as a physical specimen. If you want to look at the herbarium, what you go now, you to go to the your department herbarium collection, pull out the herbarium sheet, critically examine the plant. It's a dried plant. You look at flower, you look at leaf, you look at flowers, and so forth. And it also comes with a label on the right hand side, especially in case of herbarium. And in case of animals, there will be on in the box, there will be a label which will have information like family, genus, species, collector name, collector date, then location of collection, habitat in which they have collected, and any other information associated uh, with that collection, right? Each herbarium should have all this information, or collection should have all those information. If this information is missing, means your collection is a waste. You can throw it. Okay. So all this information, it was there as a hard copy till 10 years back or 20 years back. All of these collections were in the physical jars or a herbarium sheet, and so forth. What the scientists did was, later they started digitizing it. Digitizing here, I mean entering the information what is there on a herbarium sheet or on a jar which contain insect or any animal. That label has been digitized. Digitized means entered into the computer database. They created a large database which will have the columns like kingdom, phylum, uh, class, order, family, genus, subgenus, species, subspecies. In case of plant, there will be tribe and so forth, and collection name, collection date, uh, associated information. Okay, all those information what is there on a physical herbarium sheet. Maybe after this talk, you can go to the department herbarium and look at it. What kind of information is there on the right hand side of the herbarium sheet? Okay, all those information on the herbarium sheet has been entered into a computer in an Excel database or MS Access database or MySQL database. There are many such databases which will help you to enter this information. This is called as digitization. The documentation people have done in last 300 years or so, in last 20-25 years, people have started digitizing it. That means entering into the computer database. Clear? So there are several global examples of uh, the converting that physical specimen into a digitized specimens. Like, America has got advancing digitization of biodiversity collections. Australia has got Atlas of Living Australia. Mexico had got its own sound database. Brazil has, China, and globally there is one which is available for you guys. You can just check in, called Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which has got more than 150 million, nearly 200 million now, data across the world, curated, and anybody can go, log in, and download the data, which has been digitized by people around the world, including Indian scientists. So there are many such effort across the globe which has uh, converted that physical specimen into a digitized specimens. I'll show you some of the photographs later. So India also has got India Biodiversity Information Network, and Zoological Survey of India and Botanical Survey of India also digitized into an electronic form. As Sir was telling, you have down here in the library, they have downloaded so much of reference material, but it has not been curated. It has been not been kept in one place. Okay, what this digitization help us is to keep every specimen record in a very organized way. Organized here, I mean, if you give a keyword like Alstonia scholaris or Adathoda vasaka, that's a plant name, you will get the information regarding that plant, how many data points, where it is collected, who collected, which part of the country it has come from, so and so forth. It is a very organized database that has been created so that it is very easily accessible to students like you, or researchers like you, or scientists who wants to use that data to do any other research in the future. Okay, am I clear? If there's any question, please stop and ask me. Yeah, if there's any. So, yeah, this is one of the example of Natural History Museum London, which is one of the biggest museum in the world, and they have got fantastic collection from all over the world. What they did was, whatever they collected in last 260 years, that museum is more than 250-year old or so old. They have collected, British has occupied most part of the world, isn't it, as a colonizer. So they collected specimen, shifted it to the Natural History Museum London. They digitized it, and they mapped it from where they have collected this specimen. As you can see here, they have, from India and Sri Lanka, there are a lot of collection, Southeast Asia, Africa, most of the Europe, and most part of America, and less part of South America. So they digitized this their collection in the museum and mapped it. Now they can identify where are the gaps in their collection and build their collection in the future going to that area. Got it? Right? So they have not only collected and documented it, but also digitized to show this beautiful map, so that where are the specimens have come from. Okay, so this is one part of biodiversity documentation and digitization, where naturalists, ecologists, teachers, and others who have collected the physical specimen, deposited in the herbarium, museum, and other place, including the college museum and herbarium, and trying to digitize it. That's the first part of the story. There is a second part of the story here, that there's a second part of the story. So with the advent of camera, mobile, and internet, a lot of people are taking photographs. I'm sure all of you use smartphone, and this smartphone will have a camera, and smartphone will have a lot of other apps which you use, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on and so forth, social media, what we call. And there are photo sharing website like Flickr, iNaturalist, India Biodiversity Portal, and so on and so forth. Even because of this advent of technology. Technology here, I mean the mobile technology, internet technology, and the camera, that is the filming, photographing technology. People, even the common man, started documenting. Maybe a housewife, a clerk, or a student who are non-professional. Non-professional here, I mean, they are not researcher, they are not biodiversity researchers. They are working in bank, they are software engineers, a lady working as a housewife. They all started showing interest in the biodiversity in and around our area. They are all scientists, citizen scientists. They are not formal scientists, but they are all citizen scientists. They started taking the photograph and uploading into the websites. There are websites which allow you to share your photograph with some information, like, where did you take, what species it is, what's the date of photography, and so on and so forth. And all these who are non-professional, who are not making money from these activity, are called citizen scientists. So they practice citizen scientists practice citizen science. What does the citizen science means? The citizen science is the systematic collection and analysis of data, development of technology, testing of natural phenomena, and dissemination of these activities by research on a primarily on a vocational basis. This is a very important. They are also researchers, but they are non-professionals, and they do it on a vocational basis. They are not a full-time scientist. They are a citizen scientist. They are volunteers. They collect their data on a voluntary basis without any monetary benefit. They don't get money out of it. They collect the data, they'll analyze, they develop technology, and so on and so forth. So all these have become citizen science. Okay. And citizen science is nothing new, actually, if speaking. If you know, the America and in Europe, the volunteers are collecting the data for scientists. Scientists like you and me, the common man, are collecting the data for no personal benefit. They want to contribute to the science. They want to help you and me. People like you and me, they are helping. So there are so many such surveys in America, like Breeding Bird Survey, Christmas Bird Survey, Project Feeder, and so forth. And also, if you are bird watcher, you know the great backyard bird count, which happens in India every year on the date of Dr. Salim Ali. So this is happening for very long time in America. In India, it's only in the last 10 or 15 years it has been taking place. So here is also people are documenting. Got it? The citizens who are non-professionals are also documenting the data and digitizing it. Digitizing means once they upload that information, it will be in a database in some country, maybe India, US, Europe, or some country. Depends on where the database has been created. So the citizens' data, what they collected in the form of photograph and others, also contribute to the documentation of biodiversity in and around you. If somebody says that documentation is only the collection of specimen, please do disagree with them. You don't have to collect a crow and keep it in a museum to show that it's a crow, right? You can identify a crow by looking at the photograph. You can identify a mango plant, mango fruit using the photograph. Every time you don't have to collect. Similarly, jackfruit or most common plants, you don't have to collect and keep it in a museum. Instead of that, you can take photograph, very good photograph from a different angle. That is also very, very, very valuable information. So the biodiversity documentation and digitization is happening from last 300 years. Documentation and the digitization in the last 20 years, that is also added by the latest technology like mobile technology, internet technology, and the web technology. This so so all this data collected by researchers, scientists, and citizen science, what will they do it? How do they digitize it? They create a database. Database is nothing but it's a structured set of data held in a computer, especially one that is accessible in various ways. Huh? Database, when you are all scientists, you enter the data in Excel, right? You all use the Excel, right? It has got columns and rows. First column will always have a heading, like species, family, genus, species, author, year, location, size of the plant, height of the plant, latitude, longitude. All these you are entering in a different columns in an Excel sheet. That's the simplest of the database. Okay, that's a database, but it's a very simple database. This database is very easy to retrieve. If you give a keyword like a jackfruit, if you entered a jackfruit, you will get all the records which have a jackfruit or a mango or a scientific name, Autocarpus heterophyllus or Mangifera indica. Okay, so database should retrieve your data by using keywords. Okay, so that's very, very easy. Fine. You don't have to go and manually look for thousands of records. So what you do is, you search by a keyword, right? Just like searching your Google. Everybody has used Google. You give a keyword like medicinal properties of Adatoda vasaka. If you give that keyword, you will get all the records in the Google, right? What is that Google has done? They created the database in the backside. When you give the keyword search, the Google will retrieve and show it to you. That's a database. Okay. Similarly, biodiversity database is also like that. Okay. In the back end, there's a database. In the front end, it's a keyword search where you will get the information. Okay. So these database are very, very useful, and there are a million ways you can make use of this data. You might ask, what's the use? What to do with that data? I'll give you n number of examples to impress you that you can do these kind of analysis in your research. Okay, either early career researchers you are, postdocs are there, lecturers are there. You can do these kind of some of these biodiversity research sitting in front of your computer, retrieving the data, what is there in the database, and analyzing and writing the paper. Good paper you can write. I will give you an example from my own study, plus few study from other parts of the world where they have used the biodiversity data housed in the museum or herbarium, and biodiversity data collected by the citizen scientists. So once you document and digitize, you can do the taxonomic work with that data, with that database what you have created. You can ask evolutionary biology related question. You can ask conservation related questions and do the conservation related activities. You can use that data for educating purpose, for forest managers, policymakers, politicians, or whoever it is. They can use it for the education purpose or bring about the policy change at the state or central government level. You can use this data. You can identify the patterns, how the biodiversity is distributed, where it's distributed, why it is distributed like that. All these questions can be used using the patterns. And also, as sir was telling, I do a lot of some climate change related stuff. I use this biodiversity data, which is digitized, in addressing some of these questions, some of these boxes which I put it. Fine. Am I clear till now? Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, I'll start off with a story. Everybody knows Ramayana. I'm not here to teach Ramayana. Please excuse me for that. I'm not here to teach Ramayana, but I'll try to impress you about the use of database, how the database can be used to address some of the questions. So everybody knows Ramayana. And Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita, when they were in Vanavasa, when Rama and Lakshmana went out to hunt the deer, Sita was alone. in her hut, Panchavati, or whatever the hut is called. So what happened was Ravan came there looking at the beauty of Sita, abducted her, okay, and took her to the Sri Lanka. And what has happened after that was, Rama, Lakshmana, along with Hanuman and his team, they went to conquered Sri Lanka, that Lanka, and wage war with the Ravan. During this war, Lakshmana gets injured because of the poisonous arrow which hits him, and he gets into coma. So what happened was, because of he was in a coma, he can't fight. Rama cannot leave his brother in that situation. He couldn't fight with the Ravan to get back his beloved wife. So they got a doctor to look at Lakshmana's condition. A doctor said, there's only one plant available in the mountains which can bring back Lakshmana into life. So the task has been given to Hanuman to get that plant. Hanuman is not a taxonomist. He is not a taxonomist like you and me. So he didn't know what plant it is. So he got whole mountain, as it depicted here in this picture. He got this mountain, and the doctor who was treating Lakshmana took out this particular plant and given him some medicine made up of that plant, and resurrected him from the dying health to come back to the life, and he can start fighting with evil forces in Lanka. So, yeah, as you all know that the plant or the medicine what the Lakshmana got is called as Sanjeevani. I'm not teaching you the Ramayana here. I'm coming to the point now. Does Sanjeevani exist? Isn't it? It may be false. It may be true. We don't know. I'm not, as I told you, I'm not here to teach Ramayana, but I'm going to impress upon you that there are small questions you can address like this. Does Sanjeevani exist? Okay. So, what is Sanjeevani? Okay. So the author of this paper, they come up these four possibilities. It referred to a specific plant which is available now, or it might have gone extinct, but it has got a very strong medicinal property which can bring your dying health back into life. Okay, it can resurrect your life. Okay, that is one possibility of the Sanjeevani plant. It's just a term. It's a conceptual term which can conceptual term to a group of plants, not one plant, but there are n number of plants, 5, 10, 15 or whatever, which can bring back life. Dying, it can invigorate dying health. It's just a third possibility could be it's just a plant with a good medicinal property. Fourth, it's just an imaginary plant which never existed. These are the four possibilities. Okay, these authors have come up with. What did they do is they built a mega database of India's flora. Okay, all flora from India. There are thousands of floras have been digitized into a large database called Sasya Sampada. Okay, it had more than several lakh records of plants from Indian region, and it has the names. Each plant will have a name from as many as 80 different languages and dialects from India, maybe Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Tulu, Konkani, and so on and so forth. There are so many languages in India and dialect. We are very proud of it, right? So they have digitized everything from all the possible flora and literature, created a database. From this database, they searched for synonyms for Sanjeevani, which is mentioned in the Ayurvedic text as well as the floral text, and also phononyms. Phononyms means the sound which is similar to the word Sanjeevani. Okay, it's phononyms is sounding similar to word Sanjeevani. So search into this database, and they came up with four hypotheses. Okay, so what are the four things they came up with after digitizing this flora? The first, the plant must have been referred in different languages in India with the term closer to Sanjeevani. See, if it is a very common plant used in India, across India, that means it should have been referred in various languages, right? Not only in South India, not only in North India, but if that plant is really existed, means it should have, or people have used it in the early days, means it should have been mentioned in different languages of India. Okay, and the plant should occurring in the high altitude. As you remember that I told, this plant is available in the mountain. So if Sanjeevani should be available in the mountain, the high altitude. Third point is it's a very effective medicinal plant which can resurrect life. That's what the story tells. It's a dying health, and it's a medicinal plant which after consumption he got back to his the normal life. So they used these four hypotheses and searched the database and came up with these three possible plants. Possible. It is not the authors never say that this is the Sanjeevani. These are the possible plants. One is Convolvulus member, Convolvulus serratia. Second was Selaginella bryopteris. Third one, Dendrobium fimbriatum. So if you look at these three plants, its distribution, habitat, and medicinal value, first one is ruled out because it is not found in high altitude. That left with two, Selaginella and Dendrobium. One is Selaginella, that's a pteridophyte. The other one is orchid. So if you look at the medicinal value, what is there in the Ayurvedic text and the floras, it has got very high, very potent medicinal value. So the authors say that these two are possible plant which is referred to as Sanjeevani. But further research is needed to look at its potency in bringing back deteriorating health. So this is the very beautiful small work the authors have done to show that creating a database of flora, which is our Ayurvedic text, where you can address on small research question, does the Sanjeevani really exist or not? Still, we don't know whether it's exist or not, but we have some broader idea now that these two probably was referred to Sanjeevani in our historical Ayurvedic text or the flora of India. So maybe doctors, Ayurvedic and other researchers can look at the molecular part of it, proteomics part of it, and try to understand whether this species is really have got that medicinal property or not. Instead of scanning through 17,000 species found in India, now you can scan through only 2 or 3 species to look at its potential medicinal property, which will have an implication for health of the humans in the future. That's one example. Second is evolutionary mechanism. The databases what has been created used to address evolutionary mechanism. So we all know that we'll get the monsoon in India, southwest monsoon and the northeast monsoon. Southwest monsoon is mostly southern India, western India, and northern India. You are from Madurai, Chennai, Thoothukudi, Tirunelveli. Those regions will get monsoon during October onwards or November. October, November, December, that month. That is called northeast monsoon or retreating monsoon. Okay, I am from coastal Karnataka. We get southwest monsoon, and you guys get northeast monsoon. So what would we do is, there are plants which are found, like as this question says, there are plants which are found in both west coast of India and east coast of India. Same plant, it's not a different species, but the same species of plant which fruits are dispersed by wind. So species occurring in let us say Mangalore, and the same species occurring in Chennai, do they flower at the same time and disperse the seeds at the same time? Got it, right? Same species, but occurs at the two different monsoon regions. Do they flower at the same time or at a different time? This is what we asked. If you look at this graph, don't worry too much. What will happen is, before the rainfall, those species which disperse their those species which disperse their seed by wind, like those species which has got this kind of wings, should disperse their seed before the monsoon. Got it? Why before the monsoon? If the rain comes, then the seeds will get wet, they can't fly. Got it? Got it, right? Apocynaceae member, Asclepiadaceae member have got very thin filamentous wing-like structures, or Dipterocarpaceae as you member. You are all botanists, I can tell you. They want wind to disperse. If the wings get wet, they can't disperse, right? If you get wet in the rain, you can't run fast, right? If the bird's wing get wet, they can't fly, right? So plants have used this, come up with a method to disperse the seed before the rainfall falls. That's what this graph says. So there are no such prediction. What we I'll skip all this. Did was, we collected the data for 33 trees, climbers, and shrubs, which is found in both Mangalore as well as in the Pondicherry, Chennai region. We also got the data from data on rain and wind. Okay, and what this graph shows is, don't worry too much. Oops. Oops, sorry. It's crashed. Just a moment. Am I clear till now? Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If there's any question, if there's any doubt, please ask me. Okay, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, since you're all researchers or early career researchers. I'm trying to give you not simply make the database, but with that database, what questions you can ask, right? I'm trying to impress upon you that these kind of questions will have very, very high implications for your own research. Okay, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. Just a moment, there's some technical lag. Is it visible? Okay. So what we did was, we did some analysis, and as you can make out from this graph, this is the rainfall. You know, in West Coast, rains will start around early June. June 2nd, rainfall hits Kerala and goes till October. if my hypothesis is right, that plants has to disperse their seed before the monsoon start. You see here, graphs down here, most of the plants disperse their seed before June. Similarly, you look at this side, right side, northeast rainfall thing. Most of the plants disperse the seed before the onset of the heavy rainfall in October region. This shows that the plants which occurs in northeast rainfall region, that is in Madras, Pondicherry, Madurai, and those region, will disperse their seed later, that is after June or July or August, compared to the plants which is occurring in Mangalore, Udupi region, which will start dispersing their seeds or fruits from January, February onwards until May. So it's a beautiful, rainfall. They're adapted to the change in the rainfall, right? They know, somehow they came to know that, rains will start here during this time. So I had to disperse the seed during this time. So that's a very beautiful thing. The plants have evolved to survive and survived millions of years. That's a beautiful small experiment, we did using the biodiversity data, which is digitized. Second example that I'll give you is the conservation aspect. Okay, entire Western Ghats or India cannot be conserved. A lot of human beings are there. You can't displace them. There are a lot of agricultural field. You can't convert that into forest, and so on and so forth. So what we did was, we wanted to see where and all amphibians can be conserved. So we digitized this amphibian data, that's frogs and caecilians and others. So, and mapped it and show that the regions of high species richness and endemism. You know the definition between species richness and endemism, right? Endemics means the species are found only in small area, not anywhere else in the world. So all these red regions shows that in those areas there are more number of amphibians, that is frogs, in the Western Ghats, and the dark blue region indicates that these regions have got very few amphibians. So if you want to conserve amphibians, you can target those regions which are red or orange, like this, in these regions. Okay, so forest managers or policy makers can identify suitable region within this larger area and conserve the amphibians in the Western Ghats. Similarly, we did for different families of frog. Here also explain the same thing. The darker red region shows that the region with highest number of species, and those region has to given high priority for conservation compared to the other region. This is a very simple work. My student has done it similarly for the threatened species. So digitized data, we had this data on the amphibian distribution. We asked where to conserve. I said, these are the region where you can conserve, right? That's the beauty of digitization. So the fourth example is, are there more frogs to be discovered in the Western Ghats? Okay, you know that if you keeping track of the species discovery, you can see every year there will be some 5, 6, 10 species of frogs have been discovered. But are there more frog? Are there any more frog to be discovered? If so, how many? We asked that question. There are some publication. We did that work, and we digitized that frog distribution data, and show that if you see the red dots triangle, shows that the frog discovery is increasing. It's going up and up and up and up. It is not saturating. If you have learned the statistics, so if there are no frogs to be discovered, the curve should be like this, flat. If there are more frogs to be discovered, the curve will go straight and straight. Okay, this is the first line of evidence we showed that there are more frogs to be discovered. Please, amphibian researchers, don't fight. Some people say that there are no more frogs to be discovered. These are all false, and you are exaggerating the number of species, and so on and so forth. There are arguments between the amphibian researchers, but sure that yes, there are more frogs. Now get back to the amphibian research and describe more frogs. Yes, there are more frogs to be discovered. I told you how many more. We did this small modeling exercise, a statistical modeling. Don't worry about this model and other stuff. With the digitized data on amphibian, we modeled and shows that for 2025, at least there may be 204 minimum number of frog in the Western Ghats is 204. When we did this work, there were only 115 species described in 2005. When we did this, there were 115, and we predicted for 2025 and we showed that there may be anywhere between 204 or so species, and it's actually true. Our estimates, if you look at all these publications, several new species have been described since 2000. Nearly 100 new species of frog has been discovered in the Western Ghats. So that's the beauty of your documentation and digitization, right? You can predict, you can model, you can tell how many more species are there, where to conserve, and all those things. Coming to the another example is of how herbarium is useful in addressing the climate change. You know, herbarium, your typical herbarium, it looks like this. On the right side, there will be a label with all the information. So there are a lot of studies from America and Europe, none from India, which says that you know, because of the climate change, there'll be plants are flowering early and they are fruiting early, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you might have heard about it. I'm sure you might have read about it. I'm sure your teacher might have told about this. So based on the herbarium for last 200 years or 250 years of herbarium collection in the Europe, they show that more than 75% of the plant what they occur in Europe, they started flowering early. Flowering early means instead of April 1st, they started flowering around March 28th or 27th. Okay, that is what they say. For 542 plant species, the plants are flowering early. So you might ask, what's the problem if the plant flower early? Isn't it? Is there any problem if the plant flower early? You might say no. I'll say yes. What's the problem? What's the problem? Can anybody tell? What happens if the plant flower early? If the plant start flowering early, there'll be problem with the pollinators, right? Lot of plants are dependent on the pollinators, and there is so much intricate association between the plant and the pollinator, right? There'll be discrepancy between the pollinator availability and the flowering. If the plant flowers early and if there are no enough pollinators, there won't be seed set. Fruits won't be formed in a number what is required for the future generation, right? So in the long term, population of the seedling and sapling will go down, and finally the plant will population will decrease. On the other hand, for the pollinators perspective, what will happen is if they don't when they emerge out of the hibernation or estivation, and the plants are not flowering means they don't get food to feed, right? They want food. They feed on flower and nectar, and at the same time they pollinate. They don't get feed, right? So they'll die because of non-availability of food. So this mutualistic, symbiotic, and mutualistic association will be displaced. They'll be cut. So climate change, what is happening is because of the climate change, the spring and summer is coming early. You can also feel this year we are supposed to get rains during Shivratri. We did in Bangalore. We didn't get rain at all during Shivratri. That is very, very unfortunate. 1 week before Shivratri there was rains. This is not the thing what is happening in the last I don't know how many million years. So there is something associated, right? So this rainfall is not happening on the right time. The summer is starting earlier, winter is starting late, and so on and so forth. Because of this, plant is also started flowering early. This is the example from Europe. Similar example there is from the Boston, USA. They have a climate data from 1880 onwards. If you look at the graph, on an average, there's increase in average temperature of 2 to 3 degrees. Okay, so at the same place, they have collected the temperature data, and at the same place, they have collected the herbarium specimens for last 225 years. So what is happening? You see here, if you look at y-axis is a difference from 2003, and if the graph is coming down, that means the plants in Arnold Arboretum in USA started flowering early compared to in 1880s. So in America, the plants are flowering early, and if you look at this, there's an increase in the temperature from 2003. It's a negative scale because there's a difference. Okay, it's not an actual number, but it's a difference from 2003. So there's an increase in the temperature. Consequently, the plants are flowering earlier. These are all studies have been carried out using the data what was there in the herbarium, what naturalists and the botanists like you have collected and deposited in the herbaria in the Arnold Arboretum. To give an example, to impress upon you, I'll show you the images. You see this plant, same species, but not the same individual, but the same species, which was flowering at the 20th June in 1926, but in 2003 they are fully flowering on May 7th. Similarly, this orchid, 22nd to 17th May, and this is a tree in a symmetry. It was flowering on full. It's on the full leaf mode on 30th May, and on 30th May 2005. But if you look at 30th May 1868, they were all shed their leaf and their branches are dry. So the spring is coming early, the summer is coming early. This has been showed beautifully in this set of 6 images. What is happening to the animals? Flowers are flowering earlier. What is happening to animals? So rats are becoming larger, right? With this example, it's in Australia. They showed that from 1945 to 1995, the rats are becoming larger. All these specimens are available in the museum. So what happens if the rats are becoming larger? Larger means more food. More food means there'll be more problem for your agriculture, right? If the rat, instead of eating 5 grams, started eating 10 grams, what will happen to your paddy? What will happen to your ragi? What will happen to your other vegetables? Isn't it? So they started eating more. The bigger individual always eat more. So it is as an implication on your food security. The rats are known as vermins and they are nuisance to your agriculture. So more rats and larger size is have an implication on your food security, right? So there's a beautiful, these are the beautiful examples of how biodiversity documentation and digitization has actually help in understanding the evolutionary pattern, climate change pattern, or understanding the basic conservation issues. These are all examples from the herbarium on the museum collection. I will give the example from the citizen science now, the part 2 of my talk. Yeah, I already spoke about this. So, as I was telling you, that in America, citizens are collecting the data for last 150 years. That time they used to note down in a notebook, and in early 2000 they started entering into the computer in the form of a database. So initially it was all manually calculated, manually written, manually calculated, like a notebook. What you all used to do. So scientists, what they started doing in early 2000 was they collected the data for 40 years or more, and they showed that the common species are becoming less. In 40 years, the common species are becoming less. Do you see any problem here? If the common species are becoming rare, do you see a problem? I see a problem. Have you heard of sparrows are declining or declined? Isn't it? Vultures have declined, crows are declining, right? So these are all common species. That means if the common species are declining, means there is something very bad with the environment. There is something wrong in the environment. That means we are doing something bad to the environment. Crows can feed on anything. You throw food and all the other waste. Crows are the one who or the kites and vultures. They clean up what the mess what we create. If they are not there, who will clean up all this mess? Nature has given such a beautiful solution for us to clean the garbage what we create, right? If they are gone, we are in problem. So if the common species are becoming rare, means we are creating problem for ourselves. We are creating problem for Earth. So this is what has been shown by the citizen science data collected over for 40 years or more in the US. So they show that mm, millions of individuals of birds have declined, almost 31 million to 5.5 million. That's 82% of the population in America. Common birds have come down. Instead of seeing, you might have seen in your young days some 100 crows in your backyard, you might see only 20 crows, something like that, which is really, really bad. The citizens have collected this data, scientists have analyzed it, and the policymaker can take up this data, what is analyzed by scientists, to bring about the change in the policy so that our environment is healthy, our environment is good, so that all species can thrive. So all this data has been collected from eBird. Citizen science data has been entered into this database called as eBird. It's a free. You can go log in, and it's a free register, login, and download the data for India or which part of the country you analyze. You can get a beautiful pattern, and I'll show you some 3 examples now from eBird data collected by the citizen scientists, how the population of the migratory birds is moving. You know the migratory birds, right? They move from one part of the country to the other part, or one part of the world to the other part. You just look at this map. Look at the date and look at the map. Isn't it this beautiful animation? You see that first population arrives, and first population arrives, and after that second population of hooded oriole arrives in North America. As soon as first population goes, after that second population here, this is the second population. Also, this is a migratory hooded oriole in the United States of America. All the data is collected by the citizen scientist, analyzed by the scientist. Okay, this is the beauty of the data documentation and digitization. You see, this is a pin-tailed duck. It's there in the Madurai, North India, South India, everywhere. Oh shucks. Sorry about this. There's some problem with the PowerPoint. Just a moment. Visible? Visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You see this. You see this pin-tailed duck. It's available in India also, but nobody has tried to do this. This is a migratory population of pin-tailed duck. See how it comes to North America and goes out of North America. This data has come from the digitized biodiversity information. This is another example of blue-winged teal. It arrives, goes to some part of Canada, okay, and then goes back to South America. This is the migratory pattern, beautiful migratory pattern of these three species have been analyzed in the North America. And you can use citizen science for taxonomy also. In UK, they try to do this for the bee identification. I'm not going to in detail. You can look up. They asked people to photograph bees whenever they see, upload in this website with all the information like where did they take, when did they take, where the location, latitude, longitude, all this kind of information, and try to come up with the bumble bee atlas of Great Britain using the citizen scientists. Yeah, these are the locations they got the bee distribution data in. I'll skip all this. This also I'll skip. Okay, you might ask, what is the status of citizen science work in India? See, this is a bird called pied cuckoo or pied crested cuckoo. Uh, if you are a bird watcher, if you are seeing this bird, or if you have read about Salim Ali's book of Indian birds, what Salim Ali told was this particular species of cuckoo comes from Africa just before the monsoon arrives in India. It was there in the literature, but nobody has empirical data, the research data to show that this pattern is true, whether this species really comes before the arrival of the monsoon or not. So this Migrant Watch initiative tried to map this. If you look at this blue line, that is the monsoon arrival in India, and red dots is the arrival of this pied cuckoo from Africa. You can see here. Oh shucks. There's some serious problem with the presentation. Okay, so this is the first ever empirical evidence to show that actually this species arrives before the monsoon comes. Why it has to come before the onset of monsoon? Because this species come from Africa uh, to India before the monsoon. They breed, and as soon as the monsoon start approaching India, they'll depart from India, or they'll go northwards, and they depart from India. Okay, that's a beautiful story has been created using the biodiversity documentation and digitization. Okay, this is the same kind of example for other species of birds. And for plants, when it will the phenology of plants, you might have heard. There's a website called as Seasons Watch, again from India, from Bangalore. You can look at it. You can actually monitor the tree, different set of trees they have there in their website. They are looking at how the trees change its phenology, like flowering to fruiting to dispersal to fresh leaves, and so on and so forth. And all this documentation and digitization help in understanding the climate change issue. Now, we have heard about climate change is happening because of that. The plants are flowering early, birds are losing its ground, so on and so forth. 101 things we have heard of climate change, but where is the data? Data is here. You can also analyze the data. It's a freely available. You can do it. So a lot of such initiatives, like understanding the evolution using citizen science data for the snails, which I'm going to skip. Yeah, I'll be okay. I'll be skipping all those because it'll be too much example on citizen science. So we need to have a global museum in terms of a virtual museum. Virtual museum will have all the biodiversity digitized information, data like species data, genetic data, climate data, distribution data, and so on and so forth. So if you have this global museum of the biodiversity information, which is digitized and documented, we can have a policy for conservation of the species, policy for human well-being. Tomorrow me and you have to live, right, in this world. Our children have to live in this world. So we need to have the policy doesn't come with your intuition, policy doesn't come with your notions. Policy has to be strongly grounded in the research, with the data from the research, isn't it? So this biodiversity which is documentation and digitized, will help greatly in terms of policy initiatives. It will help in educating the common public, educating the policymakers, educating the forest manager, and so on and so forth. So we need this documentation for education and outreach activity. And teaching, what I'm doing is the teaching to you how this documented data is useful. And tomorrow you might pick up from my talk and do some research on the documented biodiversity data which is available wherever it is, and you will be doing research, right? So if the data is available in one place, which is digitized, documented, and digitized, it will help in research and help in the larger science, just to understand the science of evolution, science of ecology, or emerging diseases like uh, COVID and Nipah virus, and all those things are really helpful if you properly document the biodiversity, properly digitize the biodiversity, properly understand what we have with us. And because of this samples are available in the museum, the bat samples, they could develop the COVID vaccine, right? If their samples were not available in the museum, the COVID vaccine probably could have much more delayed, right? So these are the beauty of documenting the biodiversity, beauty of digitizing the biodiversity, right? And also it's a pleasure with playing with the biodiversity data, pleasure in documenting the data. A lot of people are there who do the bird watching and butterfly watching. What do they get? Monetarily nothing. They might spend going to place watching birds. Monetarily they don't get anything they spend, but they get the pleasure of watching birds. They get pleasure of watching butterfly. They get pleasure of watching rare plants, trees flowering, uh, seeing bird disperse the plant, pollinating the flowers, and so forth. Pure pleasure of just for the pleasure. We have to document the biodiversity, if not anything else. So that is the last slide. So please use the opportunity which is available in documenting the biodiversity and digitizing whatever you have in your own department. Make it available in the common domain so that it's available for others. And please use this biodiversity knowledge which is available freely for your teaching, for your research, for your education activity. Tomorrow you might become a forest officer, or you become a politician or a bureaucrat. Please use this data for to bring about the policy change which is a need of our for better human well-being and welfare. Thank you very much. If there is any question, please ask.
Participants, if you have any questions, you can ask.
Yeah. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Regarding the data
Yeah.
which is collected from the citizen scientist. How can we check the validity of the data? Is there any kind of how do we differentiate from nonsense data and sense data that has been submitted by citizen scientists? How do we differentiate? How we come about that issue? Because if you are collecting,
That's a fantastic. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. A lot of people will ask. Even I myself have asked this question to many people. Plus, I read. Certainly, there's a problem. Yeah, in terms of identification, in terms of validity. So you are the best judge on it. I'll give one example. There's a frog called Pedostipes. If you are working in a frog, you know probable range of that species, right? Or a plant, let us say. So this one particular citizen scientist photographed this frog and put it in the website and said that I have photographed in Bangalore. I know this frog is not available in Bangalore. It's a Western Ghats species. Okay. So one of the scientists working on the frog asked him, tell me, you update this location information that this is not available in Bangalore. As a scientist, we know. Then he has to correct that data. Otherwise, as a moderator or a data user, you can always delete that information, right? That is one way to do it. Second thing is, we always expect everybody to morally right, morally correct. So we should be true to ourselves. We should be true to the society. What that is the second thing. The third thing, when you start mapping or looking at the data, you can you can make out, okay, these set of points probably wrong identification. Recently, I was developing a database for snails of India. There are several records of species which is wrongly identified. those species are not found in India at all. In those cases, I delete those records when I'm doing the analysis. Okay. And other thing is, even if your correct data is 25%, let us say there are 1 million. 1 million is 10 lakh data points, out of which only 2.5 lakhs are good data, but still that's a very good information, right? Scientists like me and you cannot go to each and every inch of the India or large part of India and collect the data, right? So 2.5 lakh records, only a handful of researchers collecting, how many years it will take, right? How much money you need, how much time you require. So even if the 25% of the citizen science data is good, I think that is a significant. I don't say 100% of the citizen science data is right. What you said is absolutely right. I totally agree with you. But whatever is there, we can still make use of it with all these conditions. No, look, understand your taxa, map it, look at its distribution, and judge yourself whether this kind of set of data is right or wrong, and then you use the data for your analysis. Okay, don't just blindly follow any data. Don't just blindly follow. As a scientist, we should question, right? That's what a research is, right? We are questioning something and we're trying to get an answer to it, right? Similarly, don't just blindly follow citizen science data or any data which is digitized. Look at it carefully, ask question, and analyze it. Okay.
Sir, is there any national or international platform to submit the plant species distribution? Because we are starting in our institute the distribution pattern of different plant species through digital mode, and we create the soft copy for our institute only. Is there any platform where we can submit that for others?
India Biodiversity Portal, indiabiodiversity.org, okay, where you can submit your observation records, photographic observation, or the checklist. That's open access platform. You can download the information, you can do the analysis. I've done myself. The frog example, what I showed is from there. That it is for entire biodiversity of India. You can download, you can upload, you can analyze. They'll be more than happy. That is one place. The second is iNaturalist. Again, this is a global initiative. You can again upload, you can download, you can do the analysis. And Global Biodiversity Information Facility. This is again a global initiative. I don't think you can upload, but you can download from there. And there is India Biodiversity Information Network. That's the Government of India's initiative. So there are several such initiatives where you can upload your information, so make it available for others, or you can download the data which others have uploaded and use it for your research. Okay, there are many such platform. You can make use of it. But I don't. But what I suggest is, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't create your own database and your own website, because it's a duplication of effort. You try to contribute to the existing one, because tomorrow, if you leave the institute, who will manage that database, right? It should be continuity for 50, 100, 200, 300 years. I have a mollusk database. If I don't contribute to any other place, tomorrow, if I leave my institute, okay, if I don't have funding, all database what I've created with my effort and my money, or my students' money, or a project money, it will go for a waste. So it's better to put it in a common public domain where it is accessible for everybody, and it has got larger funding to maintain it for the very long term. Okay, you can do that.
Because myself, I can alone upload the such information. So is it very easily available for BSc student or +2 student? They can easily do it. They take the photo and upload the documents. Is it possible for them?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
as you say in the previous time, BSc students submit the original specimen, plant specimen herbarium. But due to this situation, now the students submit their digital herbarium copy or digital specimen. So, yes.
See, there are two things here. One thing is, if it's a common species, making a herbarium is not a problem. You can submit it to the national herbarium. Your Madurai Kamraj, I'm sure it's got a very good herbarium. Or there is a Coimbatore, there is a Botanical Survey of India. You can submit there, or any other national herbarium. That is one thing you can do. Second thing is the photograph. Good photograph of flowers, fruit, and branch. With the entire branch, which shows leaf, flower, and fruit, all angles, multiple photos, multiple angles, and upload in the India Biodiversity Portal or INAT. Not necessarily one photo. Each observation can have multiple photos. You can upload. People will identify and curate it, and others can use it. I don't know about your university and college, whether they accept digital photos as a herbarium, equivalent to herbarium, or they want physical herbarium. That's an individual university and college requirement. On that basis, I can't talk anything. But I'm talking about the data what you collate. Data what you collate. Simple mobile photo or a camera photo can be, instead of keeping it in your mobile, you upload somewhere. Others can use. Every data point is important. Every information is important, right? So that will. There are thousands of people uploading thousands of images. Whenever you go to the garden, you see a nice plant, nice flower, indigenous species. Take photograph with a date and everything. After 5 years, somebody wants to do the analysis. If there is any change in the climate and flowering thing, your data is more valuable, right? If it comes from different parts of India, it's even more valuable, right? So one can think of, there are multiple things, can think of doing multiple things. Okay. Yeah.
So, sir, thank you for your informative lecture, sir. So, for your all the current issues and challenges and opportunities in managing and maintaining, we thought we can have our own database, but your perspective is entirely different. That is correct also. That's what we feel. Instead of having separate domains for information, we can have at one point, it will be useful for the future generation. So thank you very much for your very useful and informative lecture, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And good luck for all of you, and hope you will have a great time in this UGC SPITE program. Please be in touch if there's any question or anything help. Please write to me. More than happy to help you. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye.